You're listening to the Axis Real Estate Podcast, the official podcast of Axis Real Estate, your full-service real estate brokerage in Phoenix, Arizona. Hosted by Jason Sellers and Ted Work. Hey, everybody, we are back with the Axis Real Estate Podcast. If you are just tuning in, make sure you check out our previous episodes. We've got a good number of them in the backlog, but we are back with another video episode. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Dad.
Excellent. We're wearing the same shirts as last episode. I can't believe we managed to do that. That's incredible.
It takes lots of weeks of planning.
So much coordination. Yeah, for sure. So today we're going to be talking about a lawsuit, real estate wise. I don't know a whole bunch about it, but Jason, why don't you give us maybe a little primer on what we're going to be talking about?
It's been all the buzz last couple months, but it's an antitrust lawsuit against NAR was named, and then a whole slew of large brokerages were also named independently from that.
And I'm sorry, what is NAR?
National Association of Realtors.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So the premise is simply that the general public was done a disservice because there was price fixing and the word of commissions, and a lot of the headlines are like NAR slashes commissions as a result of the lawsuit, making it sound like the public's going to save money and it's a good thing for the public. But that's the general concept, is that inside the commissions were fixed, which is untrue. Commissions were always negotiated by the seller, by the listing person. But yeah, it just sounds like it's a big win for, the general population.
Okay. And so it sounds like that. And I imagine when I'm thinking about it, antitrust, right? That's what I'm thinking about. Antitrust.
Sherman antitrust.
Yeah, monopolization, right?
Yep.
It's the basically coordination of businesses. So, yeah. Price.
It's kind of like the realization that at some point capitalism will eventually, the bigger fish will just continue to gobble up their competition, so that you just have one place to go, and then you're held hostage by that one entity, and whatever they want to charge you, they can charge you because they're the only ones left.
Right, and this is something that I've kind of I talk with my dad about politics and economics and things, and one of the things that I try to tell him is that there's no such thing as a free market, because at a certain point people become so big that they become de facto regulators, right? And so that's kind of the balance of having a government institution that regulates, and then having your more free element of the market. And I guess that's kind of what the antitrust stuff is about in large part. But yeah, let's get into the lawsuit a little bit more. What are kind of who are the main players? We've got our big investment firms for real estate.
Well, the biggest thing is the NAR was named at the top of it, and they settled, I think it was $1.7 billion, and they ended up selling for about $500 million. Redfin, this was an article yesterday, Redfin settled for $9.25 million. Okay. They're another large brokerage. But I think, to really understand the concept of everything, you got to go back in time and talk about representation in general. Okay. And where that started, because years and years ago, and you may have heard your parents or grandparents talk about the old days of buyer beware.
Okay. Oh, okay. Right. So it's on the buyer.
Yeah. So that's buyer watch out.
Yeah, sure.
Because back in the day, every real estate agent represented the seller.
Okay.
So if you come into my office and you're like, hey, I want to go look at this house I saw, whatever, and I take you over there, you're like, hey, Jason's looking out for me, right?
Right.
No, I'm representing the seller because my commission is being paid by the seller.
From a legal, from a legal standpoint. Yeah. That's right. Gotcha.
And that's still the case in terms of insider brokerage.
Okay.
Every agent that works at that broker, so every agent that works, we're a small brokerage, 10 agents or so, and HomeSmart is larger, not to single them out, but as an example, Berkshire Hathaway, all these Redfin, all these larger companies that have thousands and thousands of agents.
Yeah.
If that brokerage has a listing to sell a house, every single agent, every 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 agents underneath that broker actually owes their fiduciary duty to the seller,
Right.
not the buyer. So then you have dual representation situation that you can do that, but you have to disclose it, and you just have to. And usually it's okay because a lot of agents are actually honest, right?
Okay.
There's some people that are not, obviously, but in most cases they are. So back in the day, it was just everybody represented a seller.
Okay. Yeah.
And there was no buyer representation, and there's some legal issues with that.
Okay.
In some points, right? People would want to sell the house to earn a commission. They would sell the house and maybe not disclose everything. And in some cases, they weren't even required to disclose because they had confidentiality with the homeowner. So people recognized that, and they wanted to allow buyers to have representation.
Sure.
So how are we going to do that? Well, a lot of buyers don't want to pay a real estate agent out of their pocket.
Yeah.
So what happens is inside of the listing agreement on the seller side, they carve out a little piece to give to the buyer's agent.
Sure.
And that's worked well for the last, 40 years.
Right. The buyer is kind of paying for it, but only out of the transaction.
Right.
It's just not a.
And technically, and this would be a big thing. Like, here's an example. You've got a client. You come to me and say, Jason, I would pay you maybe 1% to help me buy a house, but I don't want to pay more. And I know that usually there's a little bit more in there for the list for the selling agent. And so I would call up the listing agent and say, hey, listen, my client wants to write an offer, but I want to give back a portion of my commission to make the deal work.
Okay.
And the conversation would typically go like this. Hey, will you do this for us? Will you reduce the commission? And they say, I can't reduce because it's a listing agreement that I have with my client. So the listing agents are saying, this is specifically a contract between our listing brokerage and the seller. And you have no part in that.
Gotcha.
So you cannot force us to renegotiate our contract because you want to help your buyer.
Okay.
So there's ways around that, and there's credits and things like that people would typically do. But that's been on the books for a while, and people would navigate through that. But eventually, I think what ends up happening is buyers can't negotiate that as readily as sellers can negotiate that. That's the bottom line.
Sure.
So when you go in, a lot of new agents especially would say, hey, I'll help you buy a house. You don't have to pay me.
Okay.
New agents will say anything to get a deal.
Sure.
So they'll say, my commission is paid for by the seller, so you don't have to worry about it.
Sure.
So that prevents the buyer from being able to negotiate the service being provided to them because that service is being paid for by somebody else.
Gotcha.
And I think that was a large piece of why this was a problem, or at least it was a perceived problem there. But the reality is, sellers are still going to want to sell their property.
Yeah.
They're still going to want to incentivize other agents to help sell the property.
Sure.
Buyer's representation. And quite honestly, buyers should probably still have representation. A lot of people maybe don't want representation, or maybe they think they can do it on their own.
Yeah.
But these are transactions that maybe happen once in a lifetime, 2 or 3 times in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about before in the last episode, somebody who's got 20 years of experience doing it versus, you saw a couple Instagram videos and some YouTube posts, or you're self-educated.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
and we were talking about in the previous episode kind of how much of a difference your interest rate makes. And if you're not careful or cognizant of that, it can really balloon the price for you, the buyer, in a lot of ways. And so having someone that is aware of that and knowledgeable about those things can be very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the big takeaway for me is it seems to paint real estate brokers and agents in a light that they were advocating or conducting a practice that was frowned upon.
Okay.
And that was doing a disservice to the buyers and the sellers. But none of that was ever proven or discussed really in the lawsuit. You know, it was not about did the buyers get a quality of service. And the other this was one of the other interesting aspects was one of the reasons they found for the plaintiff was that the commission offered was the same no matter the experience of the agent representing the buyer.
Interesting.
Which is like, I think that's interesting in today's day and age of where we're like, you know, everybody's got to get their fair share.
Sure.
Everybody's got to get like minimum wage has gone up. Everybody has to get a fair wage, a living wage.
Sure.
Those are also, you know, we talked about like being able to manipulate the market. There's no such thing as a free market anymore.
Sure.
There's like there's price floors set in place and things like that enacted by government to control these types of things. But that same rule is applied to the real estate industry. And they're saying, well, okay, a commission, a 2% commission to a buyer's agent, a 3% commission to a buyer's agent, that's, you know, should be different depending on their experience.
Okay.
And that's like a little bit backwards from what they're saying is like everybody should get an equal wage. Like if you're doing the job, you should get the money.
Sure.
But now they're saying, you know, not so fast.
Sure. And so what is the biggest change that is going to maybe come about because of this lawsuit? Is there like, how is the market different now that this lawsuit has been? The
biggest difference is that where the commission is described in our MLS. So there's a sheet of paper and there's the public side, which is what gets fed into Zillow. We've talked about Zillow before. So all the data that real estate agents worked hard for, they enter all the information, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, a nice description. I always hated writing descriptions. Like, say something cool about this house.
That's what AI is
catchy.
For. You just you feed in the pictures.
So we have that public side, and then there's a private side, which is like the key is on the hose bib over here. Here's the code to get the key out, and then there's the commission side is 2% or 2.5% or 3% or 1.75 or whatever the commission being offered on that property is also on the private side. And so the biggest change in our Arizona regional multiple listing service is that you will no longer put a commission in there.
Okay.
A shared commission. So that we'll see how that kind of plays out, but that's where the change is. And I've seen something where you could still post it in public remarks.
Okay.
But then it's just out in the open a little bit more.
Sure.
It's not to say that it was like completely hidden before.
Yeah.
That was part of the conversation. And in fact, we have a form that is not used a whole lot. It's called a buyer broker form.
Okay.
And that's the opportunity for a buyer's agent to tell their client how much their service is worth. And that's the negotiating part is like, hey, you know, my service is worth 3% and here's why.
Yeah.
And you can take it or leave it, or you can tell me you want something different and I have a decision to make if I want to come down or do something else. But it's a form that is discussed with the buyer and the agent they want to use. Mm-hmm. And then if the MLS or the listing broker had a different commission on there, the buyer would have to pay the difference. So if the MLS was offering 1.5 through the listing company and their buyer broker said that they get 4%, well, then the buyer would have to come out of pocket for the difference.
Okay. So in large part, it's just a more obvious disclosure of everybody's percentages as far as your representation is concerned.
I think that's going to be kind of the effect down the road. The other thing is, I think that it could hurt buyers a little bit because they will have to pay out of pocket.
Sure.
So it'll be interesting to see where it ends up.
Okay.
But a lot of people are saying there's not going to be a lot that changes in terms of like the actual process.
Okay.
There's not going to be any huge, big shifts or like, you know, and in reality, parts of the lawsuit aren't presented as here's how we're going to change the industry to help the public. It's not said that way.
Right.
It's more like here's how we're going to change the commission structures.
Okay.
So it's the effect on the general public is going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays.
And did you say it was a class action lawsuit, or is it like class action against the? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and you know, we see this all the time in the market now, but we see this is kind of interesting is when you have a real estate license, you have code of ethics, you have standards, professional standards you have to uphold, and there's a certain amount of you know, professionalism you have to have in the industry.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of homes that transact without real estate agents.
Okay.
Okay. There's a lot of people that go door knocking and say, "Hey, I'll buy your house today
Sure.
for $300,000,
Sure.
$400,000, whatever." You know, typically somebody who knocks on your door and offers you a check today is offering you less than what market rate is.
Yeah.
Almost 100%. Right. So
Yeah.
they're not required to be licensed. They're just people out there buying houses.
Sure.
And so that market is pretty active here in Phoenix. There's a lot of, I get 10, 15 different homes and properties for sale that way. I'm on list. They call them wholesale, which is interesting because a lot of the wholesale contracts I've seen are like, by the time they get to me, are above market. They're not really wholesale. So it's just more descriptive of the process, meaning off market. It's not a traditional transaction.
Okay.
Somebody has a contract to buy a house for $300,000 and they're wholesaling the contract off market for $350,000. They're making $50,000.
Sure.
Which is more than a 5% commission would be to have representation for both parties.
Gotcha.
So those transactions still happen quite a bit, and there's a market for that.
So you mentioned how this probably won't change much about the way that you guys do business or do transactions. Are there things that you see in the market that if you had the power to, you could change for the better of the market? Like, is there anything that you see like, oh man, if they did this way, then it would make things so much easier, or anything like that comes to mind? I know it's a tricky question.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a big question.
I'll come at it from a roundabout way maybe, but like, for example, we'll bring up Zillow again. Their goal, I saw this in a press release maybe 3 or 4 years ago. The CEO said their goal was to be able to buy a home from your cell phone.
Okay.
So their whole platform was set up to be, you find the home, you click a few buttons, you swipe a few ways, and now
Put in your bank account information.
now you've got your now you're doing the loan application.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And you're not really transacting with a specific person.
Sure.
But you're developing this transaction online through their system
Yeah.
to acquire the home.
Gotcha.
And so that was, that's taken a lot of the due diligence out of it.
Okay.
And it's like, for large items like this, it's a little scary to think that there'd be that might be the norm, the normal way to transact a property.
Sure.
There's a lot of other things that go on. Inspections. Have you ever done an inspection? What to look for? All those types of things. So it's hard to say like what I would do different or what I would change to make the system better. Yeah. But I guess I would land on the communication piece. And that's why I bring up the Zillow example, because that kind of takes away that communication piece of talking, asking questions, and getting to know something.
Yeah.
And it really just kind of dumbs it down to, a cell phone transaction. But that's a great aspiration to take everybody out of the market and just, control everything. That we talk about a monopoly.
Yeah.
We talk about like, capitalism and pushing it that way.
Sure.
It's like, well, that's the epitome of it.
Well, yeah, and I think I think about like Ticketmaster and like their electronificationing, another word for you, audience, of buying tickets to concerts and things, and like the fact that they can just tack on so many extra fees and things. It makes me wonder, like, if that becomes the norm for real estate, whether that's just gonna happen,
the wholesale that I just described.
Right. Yeah,
so
yeah.
you go to search up a show that you want to go
Sure.
see. I just went to see
Frankie Valli.
I just went to see Steel Pulse last week.
Okay, cool.
You look up for tickets. If you don't get it directly from the box office,
Yeah.
if you click on the first thing that comes up, I'm guaranteeing you it is not the box office.
Yeah.
It's somebody else with a fee added on.
Yeah.
And so you feel like, oh, that's the price because that's how it's presented to you.
Yeah.
But and we're in a day and age where you got to get quick results. So you're like, okay, there it is. It's okay. Inflation. Oh, wow. That seems a little bit higher than I thought. But you know what? Everything's more expensive now anyway. So you click through, you pay more for the ticket.
Sure.
Same thing happens with the houses. Like I was saying, the wholesale. Like somebody gets the contract first before it even goes on the market.
Yeah.
And then they take that contract and they advertise it everywhere.
Yeah.
And then you're paying more for the contract than what the buyer
Yeah.
would be willing to take.
Well, you
And-
got to
and-
pay more because I had to advertise it.
And those
so
those
that's-
transactions are completely off the books in terms of code of ethics,
Sure.
Professional standards. Those are like the Wild West transactions.
Sure.
So you got to watch out. We're all the way back to kind of that buyer beware aspect, right?
Yeah.
It's like you don't have representation. You don't have the whole process set in place. And it's ironic that people are like, hey, that's kind of cool. Like, well, those real estate brokers, they just got a huge antitrust lawsuit.
Sure.
Those are the crooks.
Sure.
But this guy knocking on my door, that guy,
Yeah.
he looks pretty safe. He's got a bag full of cash.
Random guy I'll never
could be,
talk to again.
What could be
ever?
weird about that? He's got a cashier's check for the exact amount of my house.
He says I have to do it right now. That's the sign of a good deal, is time pressure.
My favorite one is, what is it? 10, 20,000, 50,000 more than your home. Yeah.
That's like a year of interest rates.
Yeah. We can get you above market rate. That's the big thing. I'm a market guy. I always believe that if you advertise homes correctly and you do the right things, that you will arrive at the price that a buyer is willing to buy and a seller is willing to sell. And any commercial that says that they got you over market rate or over, it's just because they didn't explain to you originally what your home was actually worth.
Gotcha.
When you see a promo that says, I listed my house over here and he got it $100,000 more than I thought it was worth. Oh, so he told you it was worth $100,000 less than he could sell it for?
Yeah.
Or like, how did you arrive at that number?
Yeah, it's hard because that's where the expertise comes in, and having that knowledge and understanding of how the numbers are kind of shifted around. It can be very confusing, and I don't know if any of our listeners have ever bought a house. You got to sign so many goddamn papers. It's like there's so many papers. And so it's like, reading through all of that, and like, especially because people are so extra busy now. And I mean, I got TikToks I got to watch. So, that's like 80% of my time is reels and TikToks. But yeah, it seems so arcane to someone who maybe is like, I don't want to disparage any professions. Tax accountant.
Ooh.
I guess they would probably understand it more than a lot of people. Anyway, it's something that not a whole lot of people have knowledge about. And so I understand people wanting to make things a lot easier for themselves. Like I understand the appeal of like buying a house on my phone. I get that, but there's a lot of danger in that, and it's an interesting world we live in now.
Yeah, I saw recently doing hard things is difficult.
What?
But the more hard things you do,
the easier they become,
the more normal it feels.
Okay.
Right. So it's like the transaction that you're talking about. It's like, yeah, we all want that easy way out. Is there a way that I can do this in 2 minutes? Because I don't want to think about it.
I don't want to have to check my work again. I mean, come on.
As soon as there is a hurdle to overcome, it's easier to like get on your phone and like, oh yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, brick breaker. I got the double points. So is there anything else that we want to talk about lawsuit wise, or maybe current market, or things that you see, maybe current trends that you see that affect the market as a whole, maybe nationwide? Or
I'll talk. We could talk about this real quick, maybe in 5 minutes or so. But Arizona law, there's a new statute that's on the books to be signed. It may go into effect next year. There's still some things that have to be worked out, but the concept is rental tax.
Okay.
Is going away.
Okay.
And I find that interesting because, this episode we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about antitrust, we're talking about all these market, we're talking about interest rates and how all these things affect the market rate.
Sure.
And so I've said I'm a big market guy. I like the concept of, supply and demand arriving at a market price. Well, now we've got the scenario where they're taking away TPT sales tax on rentals. Okay. Which is it's something that I've had to do on our property management side and be accountable for. And there's so much work involved in doing it correctly and accounting for it. And now that's all going to go away. Okay. Where's the money going to go, or where's our state going to get the money from? Like where else, like they're not getting that. Where is it going to come in from? Sure. They got to balance it. Sure. Are they going to raise property taxes? Sure. And then where does that little savings go? Because a lot of these things in governance and it gets pitched as helping the constituents, helping their base, helping renters. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But let me ask you this. If you pay $1,000 for rent and there's $20 of taxes in there. Okay. So the landlord gets $980. Okay. But you're paying $1,000. Yeah. $20 goes to the taxes. Once the taxes are removed and the lease cycles, what do you think is going to happen?
It's not like that is going to go down in price. It's just they're just going to raise the rent.
Isn't the landlord going to think, hey, my guy Ted was paying $1,000 last year. Yeah. Now we don't have to pay sales tax on it. Well, I'll just charge him $1,000 and not pay sales tax. And so that $20 that the state doesn't get anymore, or the municipality doesn't get, is now a deficiency on their books. And that $20 goes to the landlord. Sure. So here's a case where what are the ways that they can manipulate a market? Sure. Institute a sales tax, take that money to provide services. Yeah. Now remove that, and now the market has to adjust. Sure. Supply and demand, what somebody's willing to pay, what somebody's willing to receive. Yeah. And they've got to correct for that.
Sure. And that's what's so interesting is there's a plethora of unintended consequences for every move you could possibly make in government. Like you cannot try to predict every single thing that is affected by everything that you put forth, right? And that's kind of the danger of government on the whole. But the goal is to kind of make broad strokes, improvements on people's lives. And that's a great question you bring up, is how does it actually affect those people it's meant to help, and does it actually help them? And those are really great questions to ask. I wonder in which ways, and I know we've been saying manipulate the market, but I think maybe a better influence the market is a little bit more, it's a little softer,
Influencer,
right?
yeah. We have a lot of influencers.
We do, yeah. and you know, it's influence and the way in which people try to keep these systems, because in an unregulated market, eventually things get so top heavy that it kind of collapses itself, right? And we talked about that in the housing crisis, right? In that sort of thing is like, without enough regulation, things kind of get too lopsided and then the whole thing falls apart. And that's what we should be striving for. I guess our legislators should be striving for, to try and keep things running as efficiently as possible, but not so efficient that they run away from you. You know what I mean? I just came up with that. That's right off the top of my head. But hey, Jason, it's been an excellent episode. Is there anything else that we want to leave our audience with, maybe about this lawsuit or about any advice? I know we gave some advice to new homeowners. Maybe we'll give some advice to, we are actually out of time. No advice today, Jason. I appreciate you being here with me, and it's been an excellent episode, and we will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Axis Real Estate Podcast. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Just search for the Axis Real Estate Podcast. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, please email mail@axispropertyadvisors.com. You can visit Axis Real Estate online at axisre.com.
This podcast was produced by T-Door Productions. Theme song by Delicate Steve.